Hey, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about some body snatchers. We're going to be looking at a simple healer, but we're going to be talking in the middle about what happens after the campaign here on Rise of the GM. Well, everybody, it is good to be back here with you again.
Yeah.
I've noticed over the last couple episodes that something changed here in StreamYard where we stream from, and the intro music was loud. So I turned it down, and man, it felt really quiet today. So I'm going to go back. If that happened to be like really, really quiet music, we're going to continue to adjust that and get it where it needs to be. But hopefully that was at a place where you can understand me and hear the music. And we are here today to talk about after the after party of the campaign. Campaign's done. Lights are going down. Streamers have been strung and confetti has fallen. What happens after the campaign? So we're going to talk about that and a lot more stuff. But how are you today, Adam, here in there in Terre Haute, Indiana?
Yeah, doing okay. Glad to be back. Definitely missed hanging out last week, so I'm glad we can.
Sometimes we rarely miss more than a week, right? But it feels like it's been a while for me too. So it is good to be back.
I felt kind of in a drought, like I was traveling, so that was my bad last week. But we didn't game last week. This week, because of me again, we're not gaming again. So
we just had this episode on what happens when you take too long of a break, and
right.
In the middle of that, I realized that so 3 weeks ago, something came up and I couldn't. I think it was.
Oh yeah, right.
What was that? Like a cross country? Something was going on, and then the next week, Adam was gone. That was last week. Then this week, Adam has a work thing.
Yeah.
And so again, we've called off. I think by the time we get together next week, which I am going to be there, I will have missed a month somehow.
Yeah, right.
And it just feels completely wrong. Guys, don't let that happen to you if you can help it.
It's hard for sure. I missed the game I played with Sam here in town. I wasn't able to go this last Sunday when we played too, so I missed out on that too. I was just feeling like, man, this is rough. So looking forward to doing some stuff.
Yeah, we got to get back into it. I saw like a little video recently of a guy's like, hey, I'm going to leave. And his wife is like, oh, but what about us tonight? And he's like, I thought we didn't have plans. She goes, exactly. And she's like putting popcorn in a bowl like that. You can sit around and watch a movie. And he's like, but, I told so-and-so I was going. And she's like, roll persuasion, and all of a sudden, they're both dressed as elves, and he pulls out a D20 and he rolls it. And
is that the when D&D rules your life or something like that video?
That too.
I saw the beginning of that. I didn't get to see all of it.
It must be a things trend. I talk about it on here, and everybody's like, yeah, we've seen it, Matthew. Calm down. But anyway, she had a 17 and he rolled an 18, so I guess he got to go out with his friends. But that's what happens when you don't play games enough during the week. You start with your wife, you're like, okay, roll persuasion. I don't know what I would roll in order to stop doing all this maintenance stuff on my house.
Yeah.
But
get some artificer stuff going on there. So.
Man, I do. I was telling Adam before this, everything is breaking down. My car is in the shop. My fridge just broke down. My microwave died today. I'm like, I need to be an artificer in real life. Fix some of this stuff. Or if I just had magic.
Bling. Yep.
All right. Enough of that. We like to start every one of these with an encounter starter that you can use in your campaign if you so deem it worthy. The one we have this week is one that from the title, I would think, man, that's one I've got to be interested in because it's about changelings, but Adam's going to read that. We're going to talk about it and see how it might fit in. Adam?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So this is Changelings from Eureka. In a backwater fishing and farming town on the edge of a cursed swamp, people are being afflicted with a strange malady. Those affected are clumsy, forgetful, confused, and have a feverish gleam in their eyes. The culprits are a cluster of will-o'-the-wisps living in the marshes. After luring an unwary person into the swamp and mesmerizing them, they secret them away in a trance-like state, read their mind, assume their shape, and then take their place. After a few weeks, the wisps have drawn off enough energy from those around them to reproduce, and they've shattered into dozens of immature, invisible wisps. This wakes the sleeping victims, who may remember the experience as a hazy dream, having seen it through their connection to the wisp. The victims then head home. However, weakened, confused, and likely lost, they may fall victim to the other dangers of the swamp. Interviews with the wisps in human form are frustrating. They remember enough to seem like the person whom they're imitating, but forgetful and bewildered, as if they have a fever or have sustained a blow to the head. Wisps are unintelligent, so even though there are a few of them still in the swamp, if a PC asks a wisp in human form about the will o' the wisps, they won't provide any answers. The changeling routine is part of the reproductive cycle, and humans aren't required or even preferred as hosts, but the wisps don't know how to articulate that. Searching the swamp for answers, the PCs discover people released from their trance state just wandering about. With more careful searches, they find the hidden, entranced bodies of victims who were likely thought to be in town. They may even notice that there are animals with similar symptoms to the townfolk. Normal swamp hazards and dangers are still present too, and can be used to break up the investigative elements of this adventure. Alerting the townsfolk to the nature of the problem should allow them to guard themselves against the wisp's lures. PCs that are more thorough may wish to thin the wisps' numbers or drive them further into the swamp with a series of hunts. So this is changelings involving will-o'-wisps.
Yeah. So this one, first off, I had to really work to wrap my mind around what exactly is happening here. So
Yeah.
let me just make sure I've got this right. So these will-o'-wisp, which I think of as like these little glowing dots,
Right.
that kind of float around. They're needing to reproduce, and so they have inhabited. Each of them goes and inhabits a person, leads them back to the swamp where they read their mind, and then they change their self to look like a person, right? So they're not the actual person. The body is still in the swamp, but they create basically a body.
Yeah.
And then these bodies go into town, and they're doing what in town? They're trying to
just
get
living.
enough energy to reproduce,
Yeah,
right? Somehow they
right.
get energy. I'm not sure how they do that. Or is it they just have to incubate in this? But the thing is, it's not even they're not in the body. The body's back to the swamp. So
Yeah. I feel like it's some kind of this isn't what it is, but it's like they've like laid wisp eggs or something in the sleeping bodies. So they go act like the people while the eggs are like getting energy, and then it says they burst into like a bunch of immature ones, right?
okay, and so when they burst, then the thing in town kind of loses its focus and becomes feverish and doesn't make any sense, right? This is the wisp that's in town.
I
This
don't know
is
that they
where
talk about that.
this is where I was trying to get the information. Somewhere this thing kind of poofs into a bunch of little tiny baby wisps that are
Yeah.
still invisible. They're not glowing yet. But when it does, it lessens the mental acuity, which they already have an intelligence of 0. So I don't know how they do this whole changeling thing.
Yeah,
They
that's a
have no
rough piece.
intelligence.
Yeah.
Anyway, in some fashion, this thing in town that begins to not make any sense that they thought was this person they knew. Okay, so I'm just going to put this in terms. The blacksmith goes out one day. He's out hunting, and this thing finds him, takes the blacksmith's body to its lair, lays its eggs in it or whatever, forms a body, and goes into town as the blacksmith, has been living as the blacksmith. But at some point when the little poof happens, this thing then becomes like idiotic, feverish, making no sense. And so the blacksmith is acting odd, and everybody's like, what's going on with the blacksmith? But this is not just the blacksmith. It's also the clergyman, and it's the teacher, and it's the, armorer. And
right.
I guess that would be the blacksmith. It's all these people, and this is happening in the town, and somehow the PCs come into this situation, right? Your PCs are here in this situation, and it becomes a case of figuring out what's going on, then finding the bodies in the middle of the swamp, and beginning to realize, wait a minute. And I think, in order to do that, you have to have some characters that are very obvious in town, that they would then, when they get to the bodies, they'd be like, wait a minute, this is that same guy we was just talking to, isn't it? And you'd have to figure that out. And and then on the way, to make things more complicated, there are obviously monsters in the swamp and marsh areas, and you're
Hmm.
going to run into those. But you may also run into some that are acting feverish and unintelligent and like wandering around, not doing
Yeah,
what a
yeah.
monster would normally do, which gives you the clue that that this may also be
Mm,
animals that this is being done to. And then once you figure it all out, the course of action. What do you do, right?
right.
How do you, first of all, I guess there is a way to kill will-o-wisp, right? Especially area effects, I'm assuming, but I don't know that
Mm,
you could take a
yeah,
sword and slice through. I'd have to look at their stat block to see how you would beat the will-o-the-wisp.
yeah,
But regardless, either you're going to kill a bunch of will-o-wisp, which seems kind of hard since they're unintelligent and they're not
yeah.
with malintent, or you're going to find a way to kind of get them away from the people, push them away, or give wards to the people,
Right.
that they can wear or whatever, something to help the people. So,
Hmm.
first of all, I'm not saying that I don't like this, but I would have to do some thinking as the GM to concretely in my mind know exactly
Yeah,
what is happening,
right.
how is it happening, and how are my PCs going to come into this and make
Yeah,
a difference.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think some of those gaps are. It's always interesting. And I think it's like I don't know, this being closer to like a Halloween kind of thing. This feels like it's more spooky when you think about people or things taking over bodies, or
Hmm.
like and that's kind of there's a creepiness to that, even if it's like this isn't very like fatal or anything, but it's still like a weird thing to think through of being like one lured away into the swamp and then taken over to be like an incubator, and then somebody's like walking around in your skin, is what it feels like kind of deal. I think about like the Invasion of the Body Snatchers movie
Yeah,
way back when. Like I think there's probably been some remakes of that, but that's something that's like a core memory in my brain of watching that movie and being super freaked out, kind of deal. But the what Ty Hotel saying, pro tip, will-o-wisps have a crazy high AC of 19 for a CR2 creature.
it is
It
high.
makes sense to because they're small balls of light, still wild. So that's like a 5e and 5e, that kind of thing. I so this is kind of where my brain's at currently because I'm trying to do like modules for it, but the this almost feels, I don't know if I'd want to put this in my like a 5e game or a Pathfinder game as much as more of like an investigative, like the Vaesen game, that like will-o-wisps are a specific monster in Vaesen to deal with. And it feels like one where I'd rather put this in front of a group of people who aren't like, okay, we're going to go throw fireballs and slash them with swords to get rid
Right.
of this. But like the thing with Vaesen is there's always a how do you, sometimes it's like, well, if you shoot them enough, then they'll go away. But like there's other things where it's like, well, if you find the bones of the buried dog that created the Grim and burn them in a fire, then it will be destroyed. Like that kind of stuff happens. And I wonder about, even if you're making it into like more like traditional D20 game, fantasy game, if you could use it in a way of like, okay, this is more about, again, investigating, figuring out not just this is what's happening, but somewhere along the line we figure out, okay, here's how to make these wisps go deeper into the forest and stay away from civilization. Or but I don't know, is that fun? Like is that fun when you're like, I'm a rogue or like I'm a paladin or whatever? Like is that fun to deal with those kind of things when we've chosen a game where it's like more sword and board?
What I would
Yeah,
say
I don't know.
What I would say is I would make it as the GM, since I can do whatever I want. I
Hmm.
would make it so that first of all, you can't attack the bodies that are the changeling, the will o wisp,
Uh-huh.
because they have some sort of spirit connection. And if you kill
Mm,
this person, it's going to irreparably damage the body that it was
right.
tied to. Okay,
Right.
so I would do that, and maybe they even like at first do that to one person, and then later find that
Hmm.
person is like completely mentally damaged now.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah.
secondly, I would probably try to get in cahoots with one of my players, possibly,
Mm,
and say that, especially if it's a ranger or somebody who completely is always taken off on their own, this might be the nice little hook that
yeah.
they come back and they're going to act different. And I'm going to tell them, you don't give anything away, but here's how I want you to act different. And then at some point,
Yeah.
when a certain die roll comes up, maybe like every time I roll a die and they don't know what it's for, but when a certain number comes up on that die, then they're going to break, right? And they're going to start
Mhm.
making no sense. And I'm going to
Yeah.
let this other person act that out if I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they can do it. And
Oh,
then,
yeah.
becomes the question of what's going on. Where was he,
Mhm.
and they have to begin to figure it out. So there is a mystery aspect to it, but I think you do have to put in fights in the marsh. You have to
Yeah,
give them
for
some
sure.
stuff to be able to
Yep.
roll initiative and swing and fight things
Yeah.
that really do want to kill them, and think,
Right.
oh, what's some cool stuff that would be in a marsh
Yeah.
that would come up out of the ground or come up out of
Mhm.
a swamp and just attack, and you guys have to fight them. But then they get to the center and they have to continue. So it blends together this discovery of what happened with fighting with
Right.
then what's the solution to this. And yeah,
Yeah.
I think that whole idea of if you do anything, even maybe it could even be if you do anything to the wisp, even after they're out of the body, there's still a lingering connection. It's going to hurt. And
Right. Yeah. It's like a
somehow
tether.
you would have to like make that known. But
Yeah.
I think you could make it fun in a Pathfinder or D&D game.
Mm.
But yeah, it couldn't just be like the first thing in. Well, we're just going to destroy everything that's weird. We'll take care of it.
I like you said something earlier about like creatures, being like you, and I was thinking animals in the swamp acting funky earlier, but something you
Mhm.
said made me think of, and maybe it's what you were actually saying was like a monster, you come across
Right.
a troll, but the troll's like acting befuddled and feverish and like clumsy, and
Yeah.
it's
Doesn't
not
run to
just like going to
attack.
attack you
Is
because it's,
is
yeah.
standing there like doing something weird to a
Hmm.
tree, and you're like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Yeah. I find that kind of interesting of like, that puts a different spin on the whole situation too, because then it's like, well, is this like a combat? Like does this even need to be? Because it's not even aggressive, because it's actually not even a real troll. It's a will-o-wisp in the troll's form, trying to do what trolls think they're supposed to do. And
Right.
I- or even something like less intelligent than that. But I think that can be interesting, just to like play with the perceptions of what they're dealing with. Also,
And to keep them off
um,
balance, they
yeah,
fight something, then they see this thing that's like not really an animal or a monster, and they're
yeah,
like, what is going on? And then the next thing really is, and is trying to kill them hard, and they're like, whoa, they're on their back foot because they were almost giving it some
yeah,
leeway, and then
right, yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
attacks.
I've brought this up before. It's not a me thing. I've seen it just talked about several times, but it's like that the thing where you like sit down at the table and you hand everybody a note and it just says you are not the doppelganger, kind of thing. And like everybody's like assuming somebody's a doppelganger. I feel like you're
It's the
talking about
Among
the
Us.
yeah, like the ranger thing. You were talking about like, the ranger goes off, and I think about like, okay, if you had this scene, everybody's at the table, maybe the ranger's gone off to like scout, and you have this like scene with, okay, you see this wisp, this ball of light floating, and it's kind of, you can tell it's beckoning you, kind of let that play out a little bit, and then maybe even like, so that's all happening at the table with everybody, and it's like, actually, hey, let's step out here for a second, and you go out with that player, and I think even if nothing happened at all, you could like talk through what they want to do, and it's just like, hey, please, no metagaming, don't explain what happened outside of this room, and you just come back in, there's going to be suspicions raised immediately of like, what just happened, and are they like a wisp now? Kind of. So I think you could definitely, I think that's worth playing on for sure in a thing like this, of just like letting some like table suspicions happen as well, with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was one of the most fun moments I remember in that original WoW game. And I don't know how, I wish I could remember how that all happened, but there were times when we were like, this person's turned on us. Like it was like one of our players. It's like they have turned on us, and like we all were pretty questioning hard, like we're gonna have to like fight this person for real, because they're betraying us right now, kind of thing. And I think you can have some fun with that also.
Yeah. So
Yep.
if you can clarify this in your head, exactly what it's going to look like and
Mhm.
how you want to do it,
Yeah,
this might be a really interesting thing to do when your PCs enter a town that's near a swamp. And
for sure.
there might be some strangeness happen, and then you can go on from there. Uh, I think it would be something I would consider using, but I would have to sit down and make sure I've planned out in my head
Right.
exactly what the logic is behind this, because players always want to know. So
Yeah,
make
yeah,
sure
yeah.
you don't just go in with no clear idea.
Yep, for
But
sure.
there you go, changelings. Hey,
Yeah.
today we're talking about the idea of after the party, after the
Hmm.
campaign is finished. So we talked before a few weeks ago about like what happens when your campaign fizzles. You're going, and we talked about how D&D Beyond has these statistics that 15% of people don't make it past. I mean, most people don't make it past level 5, and only like
Yeah, right,
15% get to
right.
level 10. And so we were talking about that and kind of laughing. But what happens when you do? You do make it all the way to the end. I know you want to talk about your quartile thing, don't you? There's a meme out there of Jim Irsay of the Colts, and I can't even say it correctly, but he basically is trying to talk
Um,
about where the team stands, and it's in the upper
you,
quartile of the
you
top
can you
quartile,
can
and
check our socials for this. I don't know if this is going to come through here.
All right, that means in the upper quartile of winners, we're in the top quartile of that upper quartile. That's rare.
that's what happens when you make it to level 11 in a D&D campaign. You're right where he said you are. But so if you make it and you are in that upper quartile of the upper quartile of the upper quartile, uh, then what happens when you finish a campaign and
Mm,
you get to
yeah,
the end? Uh, a lot of times people have never made it to that place as a GM or a player.
yeah,
And the first time you do, you get there and you're like, okay, here's this big bad. Boom. Okay, that was the big bad. So that's it. We're done. And everybody's
yeah.
like,
Right, right.
oh, okay, now what? And there is there a better way to like kind of have a completion?
Right, right.
Because whether you come up and one you messed it up and you got and it was very anticlimactic, or it was like this amazing high point of the story and then it's done.
Right.
Sometimes you have to plan. So when you read a story, they plan for this. If
Mm,
you've never looked at a writing class or read enough books to have picked up on it, but the drama goes and goes and goes, and then there's the climactic moment, and then there's the part called the denouement, right? There's the
mm,
after before the story ends. There is a place where it
right.
comes down, and there's a kind of a rest in your soul, but also a
Yeah.
kind of explanation of some things of what happened to bring it to that climactic point,
Hmm.
and what happens afterwards. And there's sometimes it's actually called the epilogue,
Yeah,
and the
right.
story ends, and then it's like, after the story ended, this happened. You see it in
Hmm.
these movies where it's like these 1950s movies, and everybody's going along, and all of a sudden it freezes, and it's like Johnny went on to, build his own car and race across the desert. And Sally, she got married and had 3 kids, all of which, I don't know. Anyway, they have
Yeah,
those like little things.
yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
how do you have something like that in a D&D game?
Hmm.
Because truthfully, it will feel more successful if you plan something like that instead of just
Right.
you beat the big bad and now you all are heroes. The end. All right, who's running the next campaign?
Yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah.
want to talk a little bit today about like what that looks like.
Hmm.
And so, Adam, I'm just going to let you kind of kick us in the right direction to start because I already kind of accidentally did too much of an
No, that's great.
introduction
Yeah,
there.
no, I think like what you're throwing out is the right thing. Talking about our socials for a second on Instagram, I had posted like our upcoming episodes, and Daily Hero Forge had commented, curious about episode 56. It's always hard to end. It feels a bit anticlimactic, and I think that's like what you're
Right.
talking into is like sometimes just to be like, all right, we're done. It does feel like, oh, there's a little bit of a letdown after all this like journey and build, to and even though I love the journey and I'm about the journey, like there's still awesomeness in the end, and the resolve of everything. So, um, kind of coming back a little bit, like the the actual ending for me. I think back at like my first campaign that I finished. We went to level 20. We've talked about this campaign quite a bit, and I think like in my my background kind of episodes and stuff. But I rushed that end like real hard, and that one of my great regrets, of GMing is like the end of that campaign. Like I don't have like a ton of those, but there are certain ones that like always stick in my craw a little bit. And that's like that was the end of that one was one because I was just like bent on we are finishing tonight, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it's like I don't really know. It's too far away to remember why that. I think it was probably just immaturity and like I'd never finished a game before, like I'd never seen a game finished before. And I think that's probably why it was just like, oh, this is the time to do this. I'm so excited to finish. And it's like, well, my excitement to finish meant that we went like 3 hours over, and like it was just anticlimactic at the end because it's like, well, now you did it, and there's not
And
really
I
any
think
resolution to
I
this.
think there's something to say in there to GMs. One, oftentimes we have in our mind a plan for this is how tonight is going to go. This is what's
Right.
going to be accomplished. And you get into those games, and if you've been doing this a while, you know very quickly that like, okay, I planned for this and this to
Mhm.
happen. Maybe just two things. And
Yeah.
we didn't even really get to the first thing.
Right. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
we got to the first thing, but that's it. Or, things go slower sometimes than you expect.
Right.
Which I guess is better than faster, where you're like, okay, I had, these two things we're going to do, and we're
Yeah.
there, and it's only like an hour in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But
For sure.
so I think that happened to you. One, in your mind, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is the big end tonight. And then it just kind of went longer, and people
Right.
had more to say, and
Right.
things
Yeah.
got acted out and whatever.
Mhm.
But in your mind, you're like, no, this is the night.
Yeah.
And two,
Yeah.
you kept thinking, okay, if I just go a little longer, we'll get there. And so you
Right.
ended up going long, and then you're trying to rush it, and
Mhm.
I think all that can happen. And
Yeah.
so I say that because as a GM, I think there comes a place where you have to like be able to know in the moment, whether it's at a game somewhere in the middle or at the end, you have to know, okay, this isn't ending now. How can I bring this to a cease,
Right.
holding some tension
Yeah.
for
Right.
next week?
Yeah. 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 That's like I totally agree. It's like don't my big suggestion in the middle of if we're not even to where we're really what we're talking about, but like if you're at that last in quotes last session and you're like there's more going on, like just say, hey, this is gonna take another session. Like know that in your mind. I think like
Right.
that's an okay thing. Sometimes maybe there's time constraints. And like you do have to, I guess, work within that. But if you have the ability to say, this would be better if we could just like pause now and do this next week or next time we play, I think it's like really, really worth it. And that was the thing where if I look at my like second Pathfinder campaign that I finished, the Impending Doom, that one was one where we had a smaller group, and I think that changed the dynamic a little bit with the end. And we'll get into some of that stuff. But they were kind of, I remember the group was going towards kind of the final, like this is the final confrontation, and we kind of paused, cliffhanger kind of thing. It's like they were fighting a dragon at the end, and it's like there is the dragon rises out of the volcano or whatever it was, and it's like, okay, we're going to pause there, and this is going to go down next week because this is a big kind of deal. And and then that gave space for this extra stuff, and I think now I know more even about that than I did then. But it allowed for there to be a satisfying combat that was not rushed, but also, okay, now we're going to deal with like the epilogue kind of deal. So that was like a big, like just finishing kind of thing for me where I've thought about that a lot anytime, even if it's not like a fantasy, if it's like, we were playing the Sentinels RPG or a Red Markets game or whatever, I'm always thinking, don't rush the end. Don't rush the end. It's okay. Like that's always kind of going through my mind because I had such a bad taste in my mouth about the way I finished that first campaign that it's always kind of stuck with me there.
And so what you do is you plan for how the end is going to happen. And what it's going to sound like as we talk here today is that I'm encouraging you to do a Lord of the Rings ending where it feels like it ends, everybody smiles, and then there's another scene. And at the end, everybody
Fade to black,
smiles,
come back.
and then there's another end. It's not what I'm suggesting, but it's going to sound like that. I'm going to warn you that at least what I'm talking about today may sound like that because I think you have to, first of all, you recognize that the end of the last battle is not the end. Okay. After that, there's got to be a chance for people to breathe and to like react mentally. And so you're going to plan, what does that scene look like? Okay. The last guy falls down. Then you have to know, okay, what is my setting and what does that look like? How do I open it to them to like breathe and begin to like explain and understand and process what just happened? That's going to be kind of the kind of immediate right after that super climactic event that has to be there. Then you're still not finished. I think at that point, then you go to the Star Wars end, right? So you remember at the end of Star Wars, after they blew up the Death Star, then you go to that scene where Princess Leia is standing up at the front in her like, royal whatever. And Han, Luke, and Chewie, I think it is, they come in and they walk down and all these people are there and they get the medals, right? So I think at that point, well, maybe I skipped a step there. There has to be like the kind of breathe and understand. But then there also has to be like the find some amazing loot. When you finish everything, there's a few things that players across the board love. Players love to kill something big and do it in an awesome way. And players love loot. I don't care who you are. You always want to get loot. Even if you're at the end of the game and you're never, ever going to use that loot for anything, you just want, there is something intensely gratifying about like finding an amazing relic, leveling up to a new level of power, even if you're never, ever going to play that, because in your imagination, that goes on. So I like to sprinkle around after that last battle. There's like some amazing. And this is where I pull out all the stops. I always talk about how I'm high item, high magic, high power sorts of games. That's me. I'm high power guy. At the end, I pull out all the stops and I give them something so stinking amazing that it would really probably be broken if we were going to continue playing, but we're not going to continue playing. And I know that this is where I stop. And, but that way they can like dream about the amazingness that they would have because they found this relic that lets them do more than they could ever imagine with their build. Okay. And so you have to think about like for each of these builds, what would be the coolest thing that could ever happen to them.
Right.
I'm going to let that be at the end. So there's the battle, there's the breathing, there's the super awesome loot. Then you're going to have the award ceremony of Star Wars, right? So they come in and then that's where they're recognized by, you've built a world and there's some sort of political power or, divine power. There's gods, whatever it is. There's somebody that they want the approval of. There's somebody that they're working for, and you need to give them that at the end. And at the end, this is the, Princess Leia, and I don't even remember who was standing up there with her at this point. There was some other people up there.
C-3PO or something.
Yeah, C-3PO and R2-D2 were standing up there. You're right. And there was a guy. Was that Obi-Wan? No, it wasn't Obi-Wan. He was dead. It was somebody. He wasn't dead. He was part of the Force. Don't want to spoil it for everybody, but he was part of the Force. Anyway, these three guys, two guys in Chewbacca, if you call him a guy, they come down and they look at each other and they get the medals and Princess Leia kisses him on the cheek and they're all like, and it's just this super feel-good moment. You're recognized in a way by not just them, but like all these people that were on the sides that they walked down through. There's this high recognition. And I think players desire that too for their party in some way to have been recognized by, and it may not be a person or a government. It may be like the God that they've been working to fight, comes and like recognizes them in some way. I think that's important. And again, feel free to give them like amazing boons from these gods that would be broken if you were going to continue the game because the game's over. You can feel awesome. So you have that.
Hmm.
Then there's one more. So I've already listed a few ends. You have the breathing and kind of like processing end. Then you
Right.
have the looting end. Then you have
Mm.
the recognition and awards end.
Hmm.
And then there's one more end I like to do, and I've really only done this with in my mind. I can only think of one,
Hmm.
and it was so good. And that was, I told people, we're done for tonight. We're going to come back next week though, and I want you to tell me. I want you to take some time this week, and I
Hmm.
always like giving writing assignments because I used to be a university instructor, so I have no problem giving people assignments. But I give him this assignment. I want you to like sit down and write, it's 3 or 4 months down the road. What has your character been doing and what are
Right.
they,
Yeah.
where are they at now? And then next week we're going to come back and we're going to either people can read those in the middle of the week, and then we're going to come back and talk about them, or you can come back and even if it's just like a bulleted list about like where your person is, not everybody likes to write like I do. And so they can just have a bulleted list, but they come back and they're going to tell that story of what happened in the next 3 months.
Yeah.
So this is truly the epilogue. This is the, like Buddy went on to race a car across the desert before killing himself in 1975, whatever. Give them that opportunity. And I've done this only
Right.
once, and it was amazing because people, first of all, like still remember those stories as though they played them out, and
Yeah.
they
Right.
didn't. But in one case, I think you've heard on here before, we had an NPC named Rolo, and one of the characters in there 3 months down the road, they and Rolo got an apartment together and were roommates. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? But it was fun. We went through them. Everybody got a chance to share at the table. This is what happens to my character 3 or 4 months down the road. This is like
Yeah.
and then, the
Right.
after. Then that's still not my final end. This is the 7th end of the Lord of the Rings that I'm now going to do. And that is, and this doesn't have to be like a week into itself, but you may say, hey, next week, let's get together and play Sentinel's card game or poker or, this board game, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But before we do, I want to just kind of have a moment where we're going to like remember our favorite scenes. I think this is important to look back and think, what were the battles that I really remember? What was the coolest like thing that we did that we didn't expect role playing wise that happened? Oh, I remember when, Cormac jumped from the, gondola, and, I can't even remember my players' names. Nightclaw did this thing, and and let them just start telling stories and remembering. It's basically going to be so when I was a kid, our family was all about talking and remembering. And my wife sometimes is like, I just don't understand why you guys sit and like tell the same stories all the time. Every time you get together, you just tell stories and you always tell the same ones. But it's true. And it is an important part of community building, an important part of feeling like you were part of something epic. If you don't ever take that time to remember some of those stories, that will fade from your mind really quickly. And it's fine. You played a game, but it's nothing compared to when years later, 4 or 5 of you are together and you're like, oh man, I remember that time in that game when, boom.
Yeah.
Well, that happens when you take some time to remember shortly after the campaign ended, to kind of cement some of those memories and maybe even exaggerate on them a bit. Right? Because when we remember a story and when we tell it, we make it bigger than it actually was. And then this person throws in something, then that person throws in something, and it becomes this thing that then is a core memory for your group. And I think those kinds of things make it so much greater once you get some longevity with your group. So if I've sounded like I just gave you 7 endings after a campaign, it's probably because that's about what I did. But I think those things can really make a campaign end. And I'm sorry, I just hijacked everything here. Adam.
No, that's great. It's great.
I've been talking for like half an hour. Do you want to respond to any of those things that I said? If you can,
I hate it all. No, I
hate it.
No, that was good.
I disagree in every way.
I had a buffering issue in the middle of that, so it's good. No, I think that's really great because it gives different points of processing what you're doing, kind of thing, and the remembering part. I really like the like just going back and remembering pieces of like retelling things. I think that's a really cool part of that of something I like have not really done. Like we do that in general, like I even lately, was playing a game with Evan and Eric, and there was some recounting of things that have happened, and he's brought up the Rolo thing before also because it was his character that ended up being in the apartment. But that happens like naturally, but I like that idea of like, hey, let's think about this now before we kind of move on to the next thing.
And I think doing that without the
Mhm.
pressure of you have to come up with memories,
Yeah,
because we're also going to play some poker tonight, or we're going to play whatever this game is.
yeah,
The buffer between when
yeah,
another campaign would start. What I would also say is don't start another campaign the very next week.
yeah,
You haven't had time to soak in it, to feel it,
yeah,
and it would feel very abrupt. So I would
yeah.
do something between, and I would make this just the beginning
Right.
part of that night. And here's the thing: if the memories get flowing and rolling, and you never get to
Hmm.
the game, fine. Everybody will
Yeah.
have had a good time because they want to do it. But if it ever starts to kind of start getting slow, then say, all right, hey, let's jump into, Sentinels of the Multiverse card game. We're going to do some of that tonight,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Right.
go.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I wanted to so a lot in some ways this episode is like research for me right now because we're not there yet, but we're like drawing nearer to another end of a campaign in the next months. I don't know, it's don't put a time frame on it if you can, and that this thing I don't want to rush where we're at either, but so I'm thinking through some of these things anyway, and one of the things that I have done preemptively, and I probably will come back to it honestly before the very end, but because we're in what I would consider the final arc of of my campaign, because that's how I think through it. I threw out some questions to all of the group. Um, and asked just like some things about like one of them being like what would like this may not be the exact question, but it was like what would make you feel like this was resolved for your character kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like Richard the dungeon crawler here in the chat said, did you have any players who didn't want to work on providing a narrative story before the adventure? And I think I'm taking that as like pre campaign, pre start kind of thing. And I did in my game. I had a wide variety of people who gave a ton of information and people who didn't care to give much information or just didn't, at the moment. And so I've experienced that. I'm sure Matthew's experienced that too. I'll let you speak in that in a second. But um, we've talked before about like I think people engage differently, and that's the thing where I'm like the kind of person who if I'm playing with Matthew and he's like, all right, I'd love some backstory, like these kind of points, like what about these different aspects of your character? I'm like, all right, I'm ready to write a novel, kind of thing, and I'm going to hand this to him, and he's got homework to do after I get done with this. Um, but like not everybody functions that way, and that's the thing. I think even like since we've started this podcast, I've learned a little bit better of some people like the discovery of their character more. Like it's like in game they're understanding, oh, this is who I am, and I'm coming up with things. So I don't know, Richard, you can speak a little more in the chat if you want about like where you're kind of going with that thought, but I think it's okay if they don't. But if you have specific things that you want, that is important to try to get that from your players, unless they're just like really like, no, I want it to be a secret. I played a guy with Barry when he was running the 4E game that was like, I think it was part of the race, but it was like, you only remember the last 100 days of your life or something like that. And so I had an ability to be like, well, I don't really need to write much because I know the last 3 months and that's it. So that was like a lot more in the GM's kind of place. But the trying to connect this to the end here, I think like I'm trying to remember that too with the way that my questions were answered by different people, where it's like some of those questions I got like a ton of like, here are very specific things that would feel resolved at the end if we did this. Here are some things that I'm feeling about this. Whereas maybe there were some other, I have some, I have players that didn't answer at all, or they like told me in person, like, hey, here's the things I'm thinking about. And just remembering that, like, I think that's a good practice at the end to like ask that question, but also know that some of the people may engage with that differently. That was kind of a side piece, but kind of
Yeah.
connects, I think, to
And I
that.
think along with that, as a GM, begin to understand your players. And so when you give that sort of, hey, I want a narrative backstory, some of them will send you a lot.
Right.
And those that don't, begin to think about like, how can I get some of this information from them? And so I think in my experience, when somebody doesn't give me like a lot of written stuff, it really comes down to, luckily, most of the people that I play with, I can sit down and have coffee with. At some point. And if I'm like, hey, let's go get coffee, and we're sitting there and I just kind of start talking about the game, I'm like, so tell me like how you came up with your character. Why did you want to play this? And they start talking to me about it. I'm like, oh yeah. So who do you think their relationships would have been in the past? Or have you even thought about that? And they're like, oh, no, I didn't really think about it. I'm like, if they did have some relationships, who would they be? And it kind of comes out verbally. I kind of have to let them lean into those areas. Not everybody's going to be like super narrative guy from the beginning.
Right.
And some people will be more than you want.
Yeah.
But then what I was going to say is, as you go through the campaign, various times through the campaign, to drop questions about their past, or to give them like you have a memory surface that you hadn't thought of in a long time of you and your father. Tell me about that memory. Blah, 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 blah. They may not come up with very much, but as you do those throughout, they start to build something. Then when you get to the end, you have like a better narrative ending. Hopefully they're a little more prepared to do this kind of like, okay, tell me where your character is like 3 months later. If they only come with, my character's like, working as a mercenary in the next town over, and that's all they give you, then that's okay. That's all they wanted to say. You can kind of comment on a little bit and then move on to the next player. And if they don't want to do that, don't force them at the table during that epilogue series to do more than they want.
Yeah. I think that's maybe I'm getting into my own stuff here, but a good possibility for like the yes and kind of thing to when they're telling you that of like, here's what's going on, like and like this is what's going on around you in the world kind of thing, to like fill that out more. And you can kind of play with that of like, if you have the person who just talked for 10 minutes, they don't need that as much as the person who gave you one sentence. And then it's like, and this is kind of what it looks like. You can kind of help that along, I think, with
and
that
players
kind of
can help that. You have this guy who like talks for 10 minutes, and then this guy who gives like 2 lines, but then the next guy may be like, and when his character started doing this, I started doing this, and I saw them like 2 or 3 times in the city, and I'm like, man, that guy, all he does is just work for money, work. But then I went and did blah blah blah.
Yeah, for sure. The I wanted to say one more thing about the background stuff real quick before I go off on my ending kind of ideas.
I still have one more, by the way.
Okay, yeah, sorry. We'll come back to you. I'm sorry.
We'll come back to
I think some of the providing a narrative backstory stuff, I have liked getting into that like in the midst of the game, through like questions that are more leading, typically like travel. It's like, and I will say sometimes it's nights where I'm like, I'm feeling a little bit light on content, but they happen to be traveling. So let me ask this question. Okay, you're around the campfire, things have settled down, you're about to bed down for the night, and what was it that started you in the life of travel? Like this kind of thing, and then just like let it go for a while and let people speak into that. Or if you don't have the background stuff, of asking like, what are the kind of the things you're talking about, Matthew, with like the coffee talk kind of thing, of asking some of those, but like throwing it into like, hey, here's an RP chance for you all to talk to each other. What was your family like? Go, kind of thing. And people can play that out how they wish, kind of thing. So I like to do that. And I feel like I've used that more recently as like a tool to both flesh things out, but also to pace the game, I think can be a help too. But I want to, Matthew, you said you had one more. I want to make sure you get that in.
Yeah, so I've already given you what, like 6 endings, right? You have the end scene, you have the breath and process time, like after that, where they begin the process. You have the time where they find the amazing loot that would probably break the game, but it's so awesome. And then you have the awards time where they're recognized in some way by whoever it is that matters to them. Then you have the epilogue where you let them, like this is a week later, where you let them write, hey, 3 or 4 months later, this is where things are. And then you have the memory session that you do on another week when you might be playing a board game or whatever. And then the last one for me, and you can kind of mix these two. We've talked about roses and thorns before.
Yeah,
the idea, like during episodes, you might say, hey guys, give me some roses and thorns. Give me 2 roses and a thorn, or a rose and 2 thorns, whatever it is. Tell me what you liked and what didn't work so well
Right.
in this session. Well, you can do the same thing with a campaign. You're like, hey, we've done the whole campaign. What was like your favorite parts, what went really well, and what was not your favorite parts that you wish maybe we hadn't done. Let them do that. That can be a through the week sort of thing, so they can have time to think about it. But then the very last ending that I like to do is the GM explanation. And I think there are times in my game where I know a whole lot more of the backstory than they do. And they make choices, and not all of it gets revealed. Sometimes I just want to reveal that, and it makes the story make more sense to them. I'm like, what you guys never found out was this goddess did this in the land, and you guys saw some of the effects of that, but you didn't know she was the one that did that. Or I expected you guys to go here, and this was going to be the way the whole story unfolded, and you guys made a choice here that was completely different, and because of that, it changed, and here's how it went. You know, those sorts of explanations of things that maybe I didn't expect to happen or never got fully developed, to have a night where I explain those and then let them just talk. And maybe, the same happened with them as a player. They're like, oh, you know what? None of you guys ever figured out, but my secret liaison was actually his dad. And everybody's like, oh, crazy, blah, blah, blah. Or whatever, they may be able to express or to say, I made this choice and everybody else did something different, so I went that way, but really my character was always supposed to do this. Those sorts of explanations in a night are cool. And again, that's something that can happen over a game of something that doesn't take complete concentration, just to sit and kind of talk about those things. So I really did give you 7 or 8 endings, just like Lord of the Rings did. So I apologize for that.
No,
but I think thinking about that as you come, instead of just thinking there is an end bad guy, and once we defeat him, the campaign's over. Thinking, okay, what's beyond that end bad guy in these 6 or 7 steps? That's going to end your campaign in a way that feels so much more satisfying.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. The kind of like fitting into that, I feel like the things I'm thinking through and the way I was processing prior to this probably fit within that. But kind of pulling, so the big bad evil guy has been defeated.
Boom.
Kind of thing. And I actually have like in my game notes for the future, it was like, there's kind of like 3 layers that I wanted to make sure that I think this stuff fits into. But one is like the immediate resolve, kind of thing. It's like whatever was happening, to take a moment as a GM to explain in the local environment, like what is now going on. And that usually for me, that's like peace coming. It's like there was turmoil and chaos and battle, and now something's changed, and now just the kind of resolve of that scene.
And now we have the start of the 1,000-year reign of peace.
Right. But local to them. And then that secondary piece for me is that like what's going on personally for these characters. And that's like that moment where I'm asking the players like, hey, I'd love to hear your epilogue. Like,
Right.
what's the epilogue in through your eyes? And we talked about that. You know, you have some different I think multiple steps of that helps them to like talk that out of those seven. But then like the third one that I really, it's important to me. I think it's probably part of the like the narrative and the discovery and the world building and all that stuff that like makes up my fun. But I really like okay, we had the kind of little epilogue of like resolve for the battle and like the confrontation, but now how does the world move on? And it may not even be necessarily, it's like informed by their epilogues, but you know, this part of this country was ravaged by war and this is how it moves forward, or the power dynamic changes in the citadel now because of this thing. And like for them to kind of get some of those views of like how the world has been changed because of the things that they were a part of. So those are kind of like the three things that I think through, want to think through. And now I have seven more to add or to like mix into that,
I was
kind
going to
of.
say those kind of mix in with those seven. But
They
what's
do.
cool
They
about
do.
that last one you have
Yeah.
is, so you say the world moves on in this way. That's the GM kind of like doing that
Right.
final explanation. That may set this world up for someone else to jump into the same world and do a campaign now as the world
Right.
has changed. They begin to, move into that new area. And that's always fun when you have a different GM in the same world doing different things.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a cool thing too that I hadn't really thought through prior. And we've talked about this. I don't want to belabor it, but like the idea of like there could be more story to be told within this world. I think a lot of times I would finish and be like, all right, I got to create a whole brand new world. And no, it's like things can continue to move and there can be more problems and stories and stuff to come up through that. So yeah, it's really cool.
Robin here said in the chat, I always like asking the GM about the weird arbitrary loot that we got and ask if it was actually part of the story or not. I think that's great because there has been so many times where I've dropped a piece of loot that has been very important and someone stick it in their backpack and then they never get it out or talk about it for the rest of the campaign. And I'm like, yeah, you guys know that mirror you found that when you looked in it, you saw something else? That was actually looking right into the God's realm where you were, whatever. And you tell them that story. Or it's just like, no, that was just a cool piece of loot. Had nothing to do with the story.
Yeah. What Rob just added on there, or asked the PCs to go through inventory. I want to employ that for sure about like, all right, everybody dump out your bags. Cause we're going to go through this stuff. Cause I think about that even mid game now. Sometimes I'm like, hey, it's probably worth doing an audit of your inventory, says someone from afar, because I don't know how many times I'm like, man, that thing would be perfect for whatever is about to happen, but we don't even remember it's there. So
right.
That's a good one. Yeah, I like this. Kind of gets into the question we have in the haversack, so I'm not going to go too deep. But Matthew, you brought up that the things that we don't know, we never got to, or what's going on in the background, and that's actually I finally remembered. That's the reason for this episode that we even had. The reason it ended up on our list is way early on. You talked about that of like the extra stuff, kind of thing, and that's what that is of like, hey, we're going to like hash through these things that were like, maybe they were referenced or nuanced or you like engaged with it, but never really followed it up, but it was all like happening. And
it was all part of the story.
Yeah. And the question we have has a little bit of talking to that. So I'm going to pause on that right now, but yeah. So can you, Matthew, one more time, hash out those 7 for me?
Okay, I was just making these up as I went, but here they are. The official Rise of the GM list of endings. Here it is. You have your end scene, right? This is where you defeat whatever that thing is that is the very last thing, right? Second, there is the breath and processing, right? So it's where your characters take a breath and begin to process what just happened, and it's going to be them like kind of talking and thinking through this for just a bit. Yeah. Then third, I like to have left, or they then discover some amazing loot that would be game breaking. It is that good, right? It
Yeah,
would
yeah, yeah.
make them overpowered, because who doesn't want to end with their power, their player being the most powerful, awesome, amazing thing that ever walked on the earth? Everybody wants that. Next, number 4. So we got in scene, breathing and processing, loot. Then the 4th one is the awards and recognition.
Okay.
This is where whoever it is that they're doing this for, everybody has a person they're doing it for. They need to be recognized that,
Right.
yes, in fact, and that may be somebody who died in their life. Cormac, whose wife died in the, before the very first scene ever started.
Right.
In the very end, she comes and she says to him, "Now you can lay your head to rest with mine."
Yeah.
He already died, but but whatever that,
R.I.P.
whoever that is, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone who's alive. 5th is the epilogue session, where now what's happening in your life 3-4 months later, or however long you make it.
Right.
Then there is the memories session, where it's like, hey, we're going to get together and talk about, like, what was the amazing stuff you remember? What were the scenes that stick out to you? Boom, we're going to just talk about that. And then we're also going to do this other game. And then lastly, the GM explaining, guys, this was the story that you didn't see. This was the part that was there that you kind of got a vague idea about, but here's what was really going on. Here's how this person knew that person. Just all the stuff as a GM that you're like, I wish this would have come out more clearly.
Right.
I want you guys to know the whole story. Here's what happened.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's Matthew's 7 endings of a D&D campaign.
Love it. Thank you. Awesome.
All right. Hey, I think we probably better move on to our NPC here, and talk a little bit about that before we end up and get into our haversack, which we do have a question. We have every time we have an NPC, we like to just throw you out somebody that you can maybe incorporate into one of your games. This one's Sarah White. She's a simple-minded healer. She's a sparrow of a woman. Always wearing drab clothes, browns, grays, with a spot of blood or serum on them. She's short, brown-eyed, always kind of looking down or kind of off to the side, doesn't make eye contact with people a lot, never looks them in the face. She is constantly distracted, sometimes mutters a list of ingredients to herself, even during conversations with people. She is simple-minded, but always pushes herself to do her best. She's always had a knack for healing in her life. Study and lecture would lose her immediately, right? When people would start to try to give her this information, she would kind of get lost in it. Keeping track of everything exhausts her. There's all kinds of formulas to remember, mixtures of herbs, poultices, all that stuff. That's hard. And it makes her feel like a failure, even when she does it well and saves a life, right? Her motivation is mending things. She's always been good at it. And she's got a reputation as a healer when she was young, even though she feels hopelessly out of depth at everything else in her life, right? She's always wanted to help people, to mend them, to heal them. She wasn't able in her very young life to help save her mom, who died during a plague. And because of that, she's always been pushed to get better and better at this, right? She was never smart enough to learn the right formulas or to go to the healer's school. Memories of her mom still haunt her and still her focus all the time, especially when she's about to operate on someone or do something very complicated. And yet she ends up being a very successful healer through some knack. So she's this really simple-minded person who I was going to try and come up with a voice, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let you figure out what that voice would be. But she can be this really simple-minded, very simple person who doubts herself, but is actually really good at healing. And so that might be a kind of a fun person to put in your campaign, and just have there that occasionally your PCs interact with. Can you see using a person like this in your campaign, Adam?
Yeah, I think I like this kind of person in a village setting. I always like the idea of the healer who, is kind of working off of remedies that they can put together. And so I do like her. She could be an interesting person to bring into that encounter, that we talked about. Even I feel like she's somebody who you would recognize,
right?
Of this is a person who has personality and, or maybe lack of personality. It's like it's memorable because of the way that she's
What would be
portrayed.
hard is when the will-o-wisp got all confused and was making no sense. You might not recognize it from her extreme doubt of herself and kind of distraction and
Right.
never looking at you anyway.
We flip it and she starts making like a ton of sense and is like way more focused and
Who are you?
it's that is a good point though, but like all of a sudden her healing knack is gone, kind of thing, because or maybe she's the help, to be like figuring out, even though all this other stuff is kind of lost on her, but it's like, well, it's the wisps,
And
kind of
even
thing.
after you get the wisp out of the people, there's still this lingering thing, and she's the one who kind of brings them back
Right.
to their self.
Yeah. So I could see her being, used in that. There's something about, and I don't think it's what they were going for, but there's something about the word mend that makes me want to like twist this a little bit to where she's like thinks of people as, when I think of mending, I'm thinking of like clothing or even like more of like a construct being mended. Mended's probably not the right word, but that's the first thing that came to my mind of like, I'm going to mend this robot. I'm going to mend this construct kind of thing rather than like heal. And it does use healing, but when it used that word mend a couple times, it made me wonder about like, what could her mental state be, how she thinks about the people she's healing. And maybe it's a lot more like object oriented than it is like bedside manner and compassion. I don't know, that's just like, that'd be my own little twist on that, but I feel like that
the
could make
idea
it
of her not having like your typical heal spells. She's not like a magic person the way you would know. Everything in her is kind of this wild sense of mending more than healing.
Right.
And I think that would give her a very kind of neat and unique sort of role in your game. And especially, I would come with somebody who talked very, very unsure of themselves, and they don't look at you, but I can try, and I'm probably going to mess up. Oh man, I wish I would have done better at this when I was in school. And then, boom,
then
the
it
person's
works.
like, they
awesome.
give you a fun person to play, but also like a kind of an interesting way to take care of some maladies without them having to know like the great resurrection spell and, remove whatever that is when you have like you're paralyzed or you're fearful. What conditions? Remove conditions. Lost the word conditions.
I mean, that could be endearing enough to be like a person who travels with the group if they don't have a dedicated healer. Kind of, what I tell said, did you steal her stapler?
Exactly. That kind of kind of person for real. Yeah. That's a perfect sort of analogy, awesome. Except a girl, you stole my, I think I could help you, but I don't know. Maybe like not even always wanting, you have to catch her in the right mood, or she might not do what you want. You're like, hey, so-and-so over here is really suffering. And it just kind of walks off muttering, and you're like, hey, and see, I like that we always have these parties that like, nobody wants to be the healer, but they want you to supply a traveling heal machine, and so you have somebody who's like a little cantankerous and you never can tell if they're going to do it for you or not.
Right. Yeah.
There you go. That way they don't just like get used to like, all right, we went in and we almost killed ourselves. Heal us up real quick. All right, we're going to go do it again, because they don't know if they're going to get that healing.
Right. Yeah.
I might even make her schizophrenic. Sometimes she does, sometimes she doesn't. She doesn't even know who she is. And, oh man, get ready.
Just make it a random roll.
All right, so that's our NPC. Maybe you can use somebody like that. Let's jump into our haversack, because we did have a question or a couple questions.
Yeah, we have
week.
Wataya's in the chat, but we had one from Wataya Hotel here today, and this is the Haversack Official Secrets Edition. Dear Matthew and Adam, I wanted to ask how you keep story or plot secrets hidden from players without revealing things too soon. I usually don't have this issue, but I was recently playing a side adventure for D&D, and while it wasn't a main plot point, there was something really cool that happened that I immediately explained or blurted out after the fact. Sometimes I find myself unable to keep story secrets, or getting so excited about the idea that I don't want to keep my players in the dark, when if I waited, then the mystery and the buildup would make for a much better payoff. So how do you two do with secrets in TTRPG games? And how can I be better about not tipping my hand? P.S. I was recently listening to another podcast, and during an ad break, your theme music played while advertising a major U.S. bank. It was very surreal, and it activated my fight or flight response.
So that would be like this here. This comes on and they're like, come on down to Fifth Third Bank where you can get 3.5 APY because this week and all through the weekend, we're opening new CDs. You know you want to save. That would be weird, wouldn't it?
It was Schmiff Schmerv.
I'll tell you this. So I get, we bought this so that we can use this music, but we did not buy the exclusive version. You can buy, I think it's premiumbeat.com. You can buy it and it becomes exclusive, but it's expensive. And
right.
we don't charge for this podcast. We just do it for fun. So we bought the lower version. And so evidently a bank somewhere is also using it. Take that, bank.
So Wataya said, thanks for all you do and continue to encourage us ascending GMs. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. So the question being, how do we keep those kind of things secret when we get excited? A thing I'll throw out is we have a problem that is, I think, plagued us forever is like, we like to hang out and talk gaming, but we're in each other's games. So you can't share stuff. It's like, I wish I want to tell you this. I'm going to give you just enough, and like we fight through that a lot, I think.
The hard part is this. So Adam and I both love gaming. Mm-hmm. We're in each other's games. And so naturally we want to tell the exciting, cool plot twists we've come up with and the stories, but we know we can't. And so we'll often say that. It's like, oh, I want to tell you this story. I can't. But the people that we could tell, because sometimes we need to bounce ideas off of people, right? The people we could tell could care less. That's our wives. Yeah. They're just like, bored, please stop talking to me. I'll sometimes find myself being like, so here's what's going to happen. And she's like, oh, okay. So what do you want to watch?
Yeah. Sometimes when we're driving, I'm like, hey, I need you to listen for 7 minutes while I throw this out because I just need to verbally process.
So how do we keep from... The only thing I can say is Wataya Hotel, this is a discipline you have to work at all the time. So many times I just want to tell Adam, this is what's going to happen. You guys are going to be you're going to be amazed. Yeah. You're going to be so dumbfounded when you find out. And I can't do that because even saying that much lessens the impact.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a recent situation. So like I've talked about this, we talked about this on the podcast. We started this game as a 2-session game that turned into more. And then now it's like a full campaign. And so I'm making things up. Well, we always do that, right? We make things up as we go, but there was no plan other than this is the one shot kind of thing going on. And then it was oh, here's a 2-shot. And now we are where we are, but
7,500 shot
during that third session. One of the players, some of you have heard all this stuff before, sorry, but one of the players played a practical joke. One of the characters / players played a practical joke on another character / player by doing these ghost sound whispers. He's a College of Whispers bard, so he followed the whispers down to the water, and I felt this is funny, but also I don't want it to just be there's no payoff at all to this situation, because that's just not super fun. And so when he went in the water to try to hear the whispers, I was essentially what it was is you see a ley line going off into the distance
of great
and that
power.
Literally that's the game, kind of thing. And it's everything is centered around why are there ley lines? Why is there, now there's more of them.
And why are doing
these? So anyway, a lot of you have heard that before, but the thing was with this of that was all in my brain for a long time of this is what's going on, but I'm not telling people that. And then one day I just decided to blurt out well, this is where they came from. And the minute I said it, I regretted that so hard. I don't know. Maybe it didn't burst everything, but it's there was a mystery there. And I don't know, maybe it shouldn't feel lesser because there's a lot of huge stuff connected to them. But I think from a GM creativity standpoint, I felt really I wish I had not blurted out the secret of where the ley lines came from, which was literally I wanted something, so I made it up, kind of thing. And that felt like it lessened it. So I feel it pretty hard. And, I think like what Matthew said is like learning to like hold that in and save it for the end when you can say, here are the things, the extra stuff, like here's the stuff that you didn't know about. This is where this comes from, can be like a cool payoff in that way too.
And that's why I have that as one of my ending points is sometimes I just want to tell them, you guys didn't know this, but this, and it was so awesome. If only you knew. Here's the thing. The caveat to that is you must write down some notes or you will forget them by the time you get to the end of a campaign. If your campaign goes 20 levels or whatever, you'll be like, oh, there was something I wanted to tell you guys. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
So somewhere have a little sheet of stuff that you want to reveal someday. And then when you come to that last session, be like, guys, let me unfold the paper of revelation. And then just kind of talk through some of those things with them.
Yeah. If you do happen to have people who are not in your games that are also gamers, though, that is super helpful too. Like I can talk about the Jade Masks game with people like Wataya Hotel, because he's not in it, but also loves gaming. Or like my friend Zach, I'm able to talk with him about games. I'm not in his games that he runs, so we can talk back and forth. And, it's like, I don't know how to say, find a friend who's you're not going to allow in your games, but
you're such a good friend. I'm never letting you in a game. Okay. Let's talk.
Write it in a journal and save it for later. I don't know, like if those are great tips, but that's the tips that I have for sure. So
yeah. All right. I think that's the only question we had in the Haversack. Is that right?
Yep, that's the only one today.
So you guys get a little bit of a shorter day today, but that is us for Rise of the GM, and we are going to be back next time to talk about how do you onboard new players, right? Is that still what we're talking about next time?
We're going to have to look. Our schedule's a little off, and it's either that or it's going to be Icon with Evan Bright, and I have to check the dates on that. So one of those two. Yeah.
One of those two. Come back next week. It's going to be fun and exciting. You can join us for that right here on Rise of the GM. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you then.
See y'all.
Bye, guys.